Next question, training principles for muscle growth while also considering longevity. Yeah, so this is a great one. So I'll talk about like a really common kind of misconception first, and then we'll get into some of the principles. A lot of people think that like training to build muscle, aka bodybuilding, is not a longevity friendly way to train. But in reality, if we're talking about bodybuilding as in trying to gain muscle, trying to improve your muscle mass, body composition, things like that, not professional bodybuilding, not going to step on stage, not taking a bunch of drugs to get as big and jacked as possible, not taking a bunch of diuretics to get as lean as possible. Bodybuilding is a very longevity friendly way to train. It is probably the most longevity friendly form of strength training that there is. So it's a kind of a misconception, like bodybuilding is just going to beat your joints up. Not if you do it right. And I'm going to show you, or I'm going to tell you here what principles I like to use for doing so, and doing so in a longevity friendly way. Longevity in this case, there's a few different forms of longevity when it comes to like fitness, but like this case, I'm considering like being able to lift consistently for a long period till later in life, till you're older. So not necessarily longevity like how long you live, but basically how long you can lift, which coincidentally, lifting longer is going to help you live longer because muscle mass, having muscle mass in your body to an extent is very important. So first thing I like to focus on, well, not all these are in order, but these are all things that you want to focus on. And this might be a longer answer too, so because it's really important. Quality reps over quantity. So intensity and very intentional set and exercise selection, not doing just rep after rep after set just because you enjoy being at the gym and you think that you need 4 to 5 sets of every exercise in order to grow muscle. There comes a point where adding more volume is no longer going to serve you. It's no longer a good option. Yes, over time, when you go from a beginner to intermediate to more advanced, throughout that period of time, you're going to add more volume. And volume in this case, in a hypertrophy or muscle gain sense, is sets per muscle group per week. But at some point, when you get more advanced and older, you need to kind of consider the pros and the cons, potential cons of adding more sets per muscle group per week. And there comes a time where it probably doesn't make sense. So then you want to focus more on the quality of the sets that you're doing and the reps within each set that you're doing. Because if I can get the same muscle building signal sent to my muscles, to my body, with 2 hard sets, as opposed to 4 or 5 not quite so hard sets, I, in most cases, especially as a more advanced trainee, which if you've been training for a long time consistently and following some decent principles and you take it seriously, then you probably are a more advanced trainee. There's lots of different levels to advancedness, but if this is you, you want to consider making your sets more quality and not doing as many of them. What this kind of looks like is instead of doing 4 sets with 3 reps in the tank on each set for, say, pendulum squats, for example, for quads, you want to consider doing maybe 2 sets with 1 rep in the tank. Occasionally, maybe no reps in the tank, although maybe not on pendulum squats because that's a very highly fatiguing movement, and I don't think it's that necessary. The quality of reps, basically the quality reps at the end of the set before you hit failure, those are the most important reps. So the last 4-ish reps of every set are the ones that are really going to determine whether you grow muscle from that set or if you really don't. So if you're leaving 3 in the tank each set, you're only getting 1 muscle building stimulative rep with every set. Whereas if you're leaving 1 in the tank, you're getting 3 muscle building stimulative reps. So that's a consideration, because you have to consider more than just, is this going to grow muscle? Because we're talking about longevity now. Joints, connective tissue, The mental aspect of getting fired up for a set, getting focused for a set, if you're only doing, 8 to 12 sets in your workout as opposed to 18 to 25 sets in your workout, not only is that going to be easier potentially or most likely on your joints and your connective tissue and also your nervous system, but it's also going to be easier on, you don't have to focus on getting ready and prepared mentally for all of those sets. Because if you're only doing 2 sets per lift, for example, you just have to get ready for 2 sets per lift. You don't have to get ready for 4 sets, 5 sets. Now, if you're trying to gain strength, different. More sets, less close to failure is usually a good idea for strength because there's such a skill component and you don't really want to be pushing a lot of strength exercises very, very close to failure most of the time because it's just kind of risky and dangerous and also not necessary. So, but for hypertrophy, as you get older, this is kind of counterintuitive. A lot of people think like more sets, higher reps, all these things, and high reps can be important. I'll talk about this in a second, but you want to consider quality over quantity. And with that comes exercise selection, exercise execution, exercise sequencing. These are all super, super important. So you want to select not the best exercises, period, but the best exercises for you. What's the best exercise for you may not be the best exercise for a 25-year-old or even your 25-year-old self. Say you're 40 years old, the exercises you do now maybe should be very different than they were back when you were 25. So you want to consider that as well. What the best exercises for your buddy may not be the best exercises for you. The best exercises on paper may not be the best exercises for you anymore. And there's a full criteria I like to use for choosing the best exercises for you. Basically, can you feel it in your target muscle? Is your target muscle the main place that you feel this exercise? If you're doing hack squats for quads and you feel it mostly in your knees or your glutes, then it's not a good quad exercise for you. And that goes into the next one. Does it bang your joints up? If you feel a lot of knee pain from doing hack squats, it's probably not the best exercise for you. You want to choose an exercise that does not bang your joints up. So that's another one. And the third criteria I like to use is, does it fatigue the hell out of you for the rest of the day after you do it? The next day, are you still feeling lingering fatigue? Potentially the day after that? For example, the deadlift, the barbell deadlift is a great exercise for building strength. However, if you really just want to build longevity and muscle and feel good, the deadlift is not the best hypertrophy exercise there is. It's also quite fatiguing, and it also tends to leave people with kind of achy lower back. So maybe the deadlift isn't a perfect exercise selection for you, at least not all the time. Like I'm doing the deadlift right now, and I've kind of weighed out the trade-offs because it does beat me up. I kind of feel shitty the next day. It bangs me up a little bit. It's definitely like not adding slabs of muscle to me, but I enjoy it. So that's important as well. Choosing exercises based on enjoyment. Of course, you have to enjoy them, but you also want to consider those 3 criteria I just went through. Exercise order. The order in which you do your exercises is much more important now than it used to be, and it's also going to be different when you're older and more advanced than it was when you were younger. So generally speaking, if you are a newer lifter or if you're a younger lifter, your first movements in the gym are probably going to be like your big main compound movements, and they should be. That's the right way to do it. But as you get older, sometimes it takes you a little longer to get warmed up. Sometimes it takes you a little bit longer to grease the groove and really just get your nervous system, your joints, your muscles all completely prepared for your workout. So you want to consider doing potentially other exercises that before you do your big, heavy main compound lifts. For example, on leg days, I always start my leg days with a hamstring curl variation, which is a single joint isolation exercise for the hamstrings, which most people, like most exercise programs, wouldn't start with that. They would start with a squat. But I always do it before a squat because A, It makes my knees feel better. Squatting with a hamstring pump feels good. And it also makes me use a little bit less weight on squats because I'm a little bit more fatigued. And using a little less weight but still getting the same stimulus out of it as you get older is great, because we're not going for max weight anymore. We're going for max stimulus. So max muscle stimulus. So that's what I like to do. That's what I like to do in a lot of my clients. You just feel better when you're squatting with a hamstring pump, and sometimes even a glute pump. And then sometimes I even do some calf raises. Because my calves are a weak muscle group and I like to train them early in the workout, but also calf raises serve, if you do them right and don't do like bounce calf raises, they serve other purposes like improving your ankle mobility, which is important once you get into your squats because you can get deeper and you can drive your knees out over your toes further, and it really gets that quad stimulus. So exercise order, also another very, very important thing, and it's going to be kind of individual depending on your experience, depending on how you're feeling, but yeah, it's super important. Exercise execution. Obviously, like, this is important no matter what. But as you get older, if you want to continue building muscle and you don't want to mess yourself up, exercise execution is highly important. You're, again, not going for max weight. Your muscles don't care what the weight on the bar is or on the machine or the dumbbells. They don't care. They only care about stimulus. So instead of trying to lift the maximum amount of weight possible, try and get the maximum amount of stimulus possible with whichever weight you select that day. That one's really, really big. Frequency. As you get older, as you get more advanced, the frequency with which you hit each muscle group can and probably should decrease. As you're coming up, when you're younger, you want to train frequently. You want to hit each muscle group 2 to 3 times per week. Great. You still probably can hit a lot of muscle groups 2 to 3 times per week, especially weak lagging muscle groups or muscle groups that respond best to isolation lifts. So, biceps, triceps, delts, calves, things like that. But as far as like big squat movements, pressing movements, pulling movements, you potentially want to decrease your frequency. So maybe you're hitting them every 4 days, every 5 days, something like that. Even some people, if they're like very advanced, even 1 day a week per major muscle group with a little bit of extra volume on the smaller, easier recovering muscle groups can be a great thing. So not necessarily, push, pull, legs 6 days per week anymore. Maybe a push, rest day, pull, rest day, legs, rest day, and then your next push day. Something like that can be a much better option. So you're training 4 days per week, or maybe a upper lower push pull leg split where you're training 5 days per week. Usually anything more than 5 days per week, pretty much for any lifter, unless you're like on steroids, if you're on PEDs and you're like prepping for a bodybuilding show, maybe 6 days per week. But for most people, it's totally not necessary. So those are all things to consider. Some other things that aren't really lifting related, but just things that will help you age better and increase your longevity. Cardio, staying in shape, staying healthy. Your heart health is very important. It's going to not only help you in the gym with your recovery between sets and sessions and your ability to push higher reps, but it's also just going to help your heart health. Like, a healthier person is going to be able to train for more years than a not healthy person. So doing some low intensity cardio, zone 2, a few days per week, maybe some occasional high intensity cardio is a great idea. Activity. So while I did say don't train your muscles as frequently, perhaps when you're getting older and older and later in age, doing something and being active pretty much every single day instead of taking like full on rest days where you just sit on the couch all day and don't do anything is a good idea. Generally speaking, motion is lotion as you get older. So you're going to recover better between sessions. You're going to have better mental health. You're just going to feel better. You're going to be able to build better habits and consistency if you're doing something every day. Now, it doesn't have to be a structured workout. You can go hike, you can go surfing, you can go stand-up paddleboarding, whatever it may be. But I highly suggest not taking full rest days unless if you're sick or like if there's some crazy circumstance, or if you just like ran a race or something like that, definitely take a rest day. But like staying active even on your rest days is very important as you get older. The last thing I want to talk about before I make this entire episode on this is rep range. So a lot of people will think that kind of like this black and white thing where it's like low reps are more fatiguing and not good for longevity, and high reps are the best way to train for longevity. And I disagree partially with both of those. So I think right in the middle of low reps and high reps is generally the best rep range to train in, especially if you're natural. Natural trainees don't respond nearly as well to metabolic stress, which is one of the mechanisms of muscle growth that you get. Like, think of like the pump, just pumping all these metabolites into the muscle, doing really, really, really high pumping reps. There's definitely merit to that, and like you should train with high reps occasionally. However, doing somewhere between 6 to 10 reps of most of your main lifts, especially, and perhaps a little bit higher reps on some of your isolation lifts or on some of your exercises where your joints don't feel great, can be a very beneficial thing to do, just because it's less fatiguing to do 7 reps of, say, a hack squat than it is to with a rep in reserve than it is to do a set of 20 on a hack squat with 1 rep in reserve. Additionally, you're also building a lot more fatigue because you're just 20. If you've ever done a set of 20 on a hack squat or any sort of squat, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's very, very fatiguing. Now, if you're doing a set of 20 with 3 or 4 or 5 reps in reserve, that's one thing. And there may be a time and place to do that. So for example, if a lot of knee bending type exercises bang up your knees, and this kind of goes for any muscle group, then you are going to kind of trade off potential muscle stimulus of doing the 6 to 10 rep range with a rep or 2 in reserve for higher reps to get that blood pumping into the muscle. It kind of can be a little bit more friendly on your joints. So that may have sounded confusing. Generally speaking, just to break this down, 6 to 10 rep range for most lifts. However, if you are experiencing joint pain when you do like really hard sets of 6 to 10, then you can try and do less hard sets of higher reps and see how that feels in your joints. Sometimes that feels better. But if you're training to like 1 rep in reserve, 1 rep shy of failure or whatever it may be, it's way less fatiguing to do 6 to 10 reps than it is to do 20, 25, 30 reps, in my experience and in a lot of people's experience. And that's not something you're probably going to find in a textbook or many books, but that's just something that I've picked up over the years of listening to very smart people talk and also doing it myself. And it's just something to consider. So being able to auto-regulate and kind of listen to your body is a huge thing, and knowing when to push higher reps with a little low intensity and when to push that moderate 6 to 10 rep range with more intensity to really take advantage of mechanical tension, which is like the main driver of muscle growth, the most effective driver of muscle growth, is a great idea.